Welcome to the Yoga Hour, where we talk about yoga in all its depth and breadth as a path to spiritually conscious, fulfilled living in today's world. I'm Dr. Laurel Trujillo, host and producer of the show, and today, in what I think will be a very interesting conversation, we're going to be discussing the science behind sound and sound's effects on the body, specifically how sound vibration can heal energy blockages, restore balance, and transform the body, mind, and spirit. I'm really delighted to welcome Dr. Stella Wuttke, PhD, back to the show. Raised in Vienna and now based in Santa Barbara, California, Stella Wuttke brings together a background in psychology, cognitive neuroscience, meditation, and sound-based practices in her work supporting nervous system regulation, emotional balance, and personal transformation. Stella studied psychology at the University of Vienna and the University of Bamberg, and spent roughly 15 years in academia researching neuroplasticity, perception, and EEG-based brainwave dynamics, including postdoctoral research and teaching at the University of Jena. Alongside her scientific career, decades of meditation practice, Kriya Yoga, and extensive travel through Asia gradually shaped a more contemplative and integrative approach to healing and consciousness. Today, her work combines neuroscience-informed sound healing, meditation, neurofeedback, and contemplative practice, with a particular focus on stress, anxiety, trauma-related symptoms, sleep difficulties, and heightened sensitivity. Stella Wuttke is the co-founder of the Infinite Potential Institute, and she is the founder of Awakening Stillpoint. For more information about Dr. Stella Wuttke, her podcasts, and teaching schedule, you can check out her websites at wuttkeipi.com, and Wuttke is W-U-T-T-K-E, Wuttke IPI, which stands for Infinite Potential Institute, wuttkeipi.com, and awakeningstillpoint.com. You can also follow her on Facebook at Wuttke Infinite Potential Institute and Instagram at Infinite Potential Institute. Welcome back to the Yoga Hour, Dr. Stella Wuttke. I'm really delighted you could come back for this really interesting conversation about sound and healing with me on the Yoga Hour.
Thank you very much for the invitation. And hello again. Thank you.
Before we dive into our dialogue about healing through sound vibration, let's begin with a yoga moment, a moment of being right here and right now. Om. We begin by bringing our attention to our body, just feeling our body in space, and paying particular attention to the surfaces that support our weight. It's always helpful to locate our feet. And after we tune into our body, let's tune into our breath and just notice as we take a fully conscious breath on the next inhale and exhale. On the next inhale, feeling the coolness of the air in the nostrils. And on the exhale, we note that the temperature is now warmer as the air passes out through our nose. And just staying right there with each and every breath. Here's something to contemplate. This is from Paramahansa Yogananda, who brought the teachings of Kriya Yoga to America in 1920. This quote is from the preface of Paramahansa Yogananda's book, Cosmic Chants. Sound or vibration is the most powerful force in the universe. Music is a divine art to be used not only for pleasure, but as a path to God realization. Vibrations resulting from devotional singing lead to attunement with the cosmic vibration or the word. Sound or vibration is the most powerful force in the universe. Music is a divine art to be used not only for pleasure, but as a path to God realization. Vibrations resulting from devotional singing lead to attunement with the cosmic vibration or the word. Om. Once again, Stella Wuttke, welcome back to the Yoga Hour. You have been on the Yoga Hour once before in November 2021, along with your husband, Marty Wuttke. And in that conversation, we discussed using mantras to support spiritual awakening. I'm very much looking forward today to going deeper into the actual science of sound, vibrations, and mantras in healing. As I was mentioning just before we started, what's always fascinated me with my dual background in Western medicine, as well as yoga and Ayurveda, is that Western medicine really does seem stuck in an old view of the universe. Physics has long ago recognized the link between matter and energy with Einstein's equation, which I think is familiar to everyone, E equals mc squared, showing the relationship between energy and mass. In other words, physics has recognized that matter and energy aren't really separate things, but are interchangeable, connected to each other. And yet, when you bring that same logic into a medical context, when you start asking, could something like sound vibration, which is a form of energy, actually have a healing effect on the body, there's a sense of immediate skepticism, which I find generally puzzling because we're not talking about magic. We're talking about applying principles that the broader scientific community has already accepted for over a century, at least in physics. So I feel very lucky, Stella, to have you as a guest today because you have a background both as a neuroscientist, deeply versed in the science of this area, and also someone who is skilled in sound healing. So I wanted to begin by asking you about that. How did you become, here you were, your PhD in psychology, you were, know about neuroplasticity and you're researching that. So how did you become interested in sound healing?
Yeah, so, although I grew up, surrounded by classical music from my parents, and I played the piano almost to a professional, level, according to my then teacher. When I heard about sound healing with tuning forks, first time I actually rejected it.
Mhm.
So I was like, no, that's that's too much. That's too much for my scientifically trained brain, right?
Right, right.
And in science and also a little bit in our society in general, everything which we cannot measure, which is related to intuition, it's kind of rejected sometimes, even ridiculed.
Mhm.
So it really had to knock more than once on my door until I said, okay, I look into that. So I got interested and tried it out myself
Mhm.
first. And when I perceived sound healing with tuning forks myself, I found I could feel a profound effect, and I kind of grasp how powerful that potentially is. And so I looked into it. I did courses, many courses up to now. I still do courses and look, deeper into everything. And, then I tried it out on my husband, Marty, first in person and at a distance, because it actually works at a distance as well.
Wow.
And then my next client was my cat. And there are many stories about sound healing practitioners who have pets or animals that they are really fascinated. And right now my cat has rediscovered my tuning fork, so she comes and puts her paw on the fork and demands her session. So yeah,
Right.
that's really sweet. Yeah.
So I was going to ask, what does a sound healing session look like for people who have not had it? And I would say, for example, that I do think yoga studios are beginning to really bring sound in, and there are like crystal bowl, sessions or sound healing sessions as part of maybe part of a class or, a separate session at a yoga studio. But when you work with an individual client with tuning forks, what does that look like?
Right. So I do individual sessions, but I also do group sessions. So both work. If you work with an individual, you can be more specific, work specifically for that person. And they usually, if I do it in person, they come in, they lay on a massage table, and then I give them an introduction and then work with the tuning forks. I have specific protocols I can go back to. Many people come with, heightened hypersensitivity or, a lot of stress, maybe some trauma. And when we experience trauma, we hold tension within us. So often it's not resolved, but we keep a certain tension within the body. And so I use a protocol which supports the vagus nerve, for example, which helps the body to go more into the parasympathetic part of the nervous system, so more into relaxation again and let go of this tension. So doing it's kind of a dynamic interplay between using specific trigger points on the body and supporting the vagus nerve. And then on the other hand, it goes more into the metaphysical, so to say, where I tune in with my clients and then also let my intuition guide me as I play the specific forks and frequencies for them.
Hmm. Hmm. So you had sent us some information as we were preparing for this conversation, and I found one of the videos that you had a link to that I found it just so fascinating. So I'd encourage listeners to check out YouTube for a visual translation of the sound of 89 hertz. And hertz is just something that talks about the frequency of the sound. A link to this YouTube video, we'll put that in the show notes for this episode so you can access it easily. That'll be at theyogahour.com. But this sound is so interesting. It's just like crickets or cicadas, but it makes a visual pattern, which is really quite striking. And that translation of a sound into a visual pattern is called cymatics. And it's really quite beautiful. The notes of an octave on the piano and as well as the vowel sounds each translate into what really looks like a mandala, a pattern that many people who practice yoga would probably be familiar with. So just to take a step back, how is sound a form of energy? As we've already talked about the body, really being, then according to physics, now we look at fields, right? Quantum fields, and so I was just wondering, how is sound a form of energy? I guess we'll start there.
Yeah. So sound is basically a vibration which is traveling through a medium, for example, air. And it has a regularity to it. It's a wave function. And this wave function, as you said, is measured in frequencies and hertz. And so one hertz is one wave
Mm,
per second.
mm,
And so if it's four waves, it's 4 hertz. And then the height of the wave is how loud it is. It's the volume.
mm,
And as humans, not every ear, so to say, we humans, we hear from about 20 to 20,000 hertz.
Oh.
Now, a cat starts higher, but also goes higher. And the interesting part here is that we not only hear or perceive sound waves with our ears, but also with the proprioceptors in our skin.
Mm.
And we hear with our skin actually better from about roughly also 20 hertz, but up to 300,000 hertz.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So compared to 20,000 hertz, which we hear much higher frequencies. So sometimes we may sense something through our skin,
Right.
but we don't hear it.
Yes.
It might be still there. So I think that's very interesting. And that's also a part, if you go, like you mentioned, into, a sound bath, like gyms and yoga studios are providing those now, these frequencies and vibrations are in the air, and that's how you perceive him through the skin, not only through the ears.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah,
No, I was just going to say, as anyone who's been to a live music concert and, has heard whatever music it is, but under that amplification, it's not a surprise to hear that you can hear, through your skin, because that's what you feel, right? You feel that vibration all through your body. You don't just hear it in your ears. Like literally, your body feels like it's kind of resonating, which we'll get to in a minute. I'm sorry, but I think I cut you off there.
exactly. No, that's fine. We are touching so many interesting topics at the same time.
Yes.
So yeah, that's absolutely right. So, if you go to a rock concert, especially the bass, and so you really feel it, see these deeper frequencies in your belly.
Right.
So if you put a tuning fork, actually, like if you activate it and put it on, like let's say on the shoulder, you could actually measure the frequency in your toe. So it goes through our body. And
Right.
that's also, one theory that, when we apply the frequency on our body, that really goes through all the connective tissues and so on. And in that way, helps the body to release physical tension or muscle tension.
Hmm. Well, I want to take a step back again and just talk in general about how the Vedas describe Om, because it's hard to read or look at videos. We're also going to put another link to a video, which is a physicist talking about this quantum field theory, and talking about how really everything is just a field, is just really a field of energy. But before we get there, to talk about Om, the Vedas described Om as the fundamental vibration of the power of consciousness itself. Not just a symbol and not just a ritual sound, but the actual vibrational expression of consciousness at its deepest level. And in the material you sent us, you quoted the American Hindu organization, who put it very beautifully, I think, in this sentence: Om is the sound of creation. It is the original vibration of the universe. And from that first vibration, all other vibrations are able to manifest. I'm going to say that again. Om is the sound of creation. It is the original vibration of the universe. And from that first vibration, all other vibrations are able to manifest. So fascinating. And so it seems to me that you've been coming at sound both from your background in Kriya Yoga and this Vedic, look, as well as from the science side of it, which it seems to me that field theory is really saying the same thing as this American Hindu organization, when looking at everything in the universe really as these waves. So you have one foot in EEG neuroscience and the vibration of the universe, and also another foot in Vedic science. At what point for you did those two really fields really stopped feeling separate, really feeling like they were describing the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I always thought they weren't separate.
That's great.
I never saw, that there is it was never disentangled science and spirituality. But there is there's a difference in the way that I believe like rishis or, saintly people from all traditions, they so to say perceive this vibration, perceive mantras. They know by knowing, while science, in science we start with a theory. We write a theory down and then we do experiments and measure things to see if that theory holds or
Right,
not.
right,
And if it holds, we keep it, otherwise it's adjusted and so on. So that's also how all the theories in physics to up to now evolved. So I think the methodology, how we come to knowledge is different per definition. And this is also where it's limited in a way because we can't really measure subtle energies.
right,
And right, so we know from the scriptures, from the Vedas, and we may feel and perceive and sense it, but we cannot really measure that. And that's sometimes what I find is a pity that we cannot really measure it.
right.
But you mentioned the quantum field theory and modern theories of physics, and then the Vedas and the knowledge we have from there. And I think it's interesting that a lot of these quantum physicists, they actually are very familiar with the Vedic scriptures. So I think they get some inspiration from time to time there.
Yeah,
But what they basically, from my understanding, and I'm not a physicist, but what they have in common and the concepts are that, we are living in a kind of ocean of different fields, and those fields are vibrating, it's fluctuating, and that matter is somehow an expression out of that. And then we have different forces which act within these fields and realms. And I believe that, with some of the spiritual practices we know from the Vedas or from, Kriya Yoga, we can actually alter or support these different realms. Because from my understanding is, we have matter and then more subtle realms going the other way around, or we say, okay, we can start at Om and going down.
right.
But in matter, all other realms, more subtle realms are present. So here and now, usually we're mostly aware of just what we call matter, the most gross part, but everything else is here right now as
Right,
well.
right. Yeah. So, touching back on that, Vedic science really describes reality as an expressive field of energy, which manifests through these three things called gunas. And the three gunas are sattva, tamas, and rajas guna. Sattva guna is a quality of like luminosity and lightness, and Rajas guna is activity, and then tamas guna is darkness and heaviness or inertia. And so from Samkhya philosophy and Vedic philosophy, yoga philosophy, they all look at it this way. Everything in existence, including the human body, is an interplay of these three qualities. rocks, for example, have a lot more tamasguna than, than our bodies do. But our mental states can also, be reflected. So we can have a lightness and an openness. We can have a heaviness. People, I'm sure, are familiar with this, feeling of heaviness where all you want to do is just sit on the couch as a couch potato and watch, not very good TV and eat junk food. And rajas, that activity, agitation, that can lead, from one to the other. So how does sound healing then interact with, with this? What is your view then of what you're doing, with sound healing as you are applying sound fields to the body to bring up some of these more positive, both physical states and mental states?
Yeah. No, I think that's a very good point. And, you can talk about, tamas, sattvas, and rajas. And I think, these energies are also the elements, when you think in fire, water, earth, air, and ether. These elements have all their positive and negative because if you're only active, sometimes you need to be steady and calm. So
Right, right,
so we need all in the right composition
right,
for the specific activity we are doing
right.
in the moment. So I think one important part is really to keep a certain flexibility. And, if people have symptoms that might be that, the elements are not in the right harmony or we have something too much or too little. And, then, like, for example, when talk about more, about the physical and, think of the nervous system, what I mentioned before, people, may be more too much in the sympathetic overdrive to more like, fighting, acting, doing, and sometimes they cannot really relax at will anymore.
Right.
And so that's also something where, both is important, but you need the flexibility and you need both. And, one avenue, which many people, I think, need nowadays really is first of all relaxation.
Hmm.
And through that, supporting the balancing or rebalancing of the autonomic nervous system. And that sounds so, simple and, everyone talks about it. But, it's so important because, for example, if we use alternate nostril breathing,
Hmm.
we're working with Ida and Pingala. And so the most important channels, nadi, more subtle energy channels in the body is Ida, Pingala, and Shushumna.
Hmm.
And so they basically more or less go along the spine.
Hmm.
And so if we work with Ida and Pingala, again, connected to the parasympathetic and the sympathetic part of the nervous system, and we balance that out, what happens is that the energy stream in the Shushumna is enhanced and supported. Why
Hmm.
is that important? Well, because, through that, the Kundalini energy, gets enlivened and can rise up, and that enlivens the energy center and then is connected to experiencing higher states of consciousness.
Hmm. Hmm. And I just want to take a moment there and just say a little bit more. So, what Dr. Wuttke was just talking about are these three main energy channels in the body. So, from a yoga perspective, this vital force, our vitality, flows through these energy channels, which are called nadi, N-A-D-I. And the three main ones are the Sushumna, which is the spinal pathway, the central spinal pathway. And then the Ida and the Pingala are Ida is on one side and the Pingala is on the other, and they rise up and cross at the chakras. which I think is so interesting because if people are familiar with the caduceus, which is a symbol for medicine, it has the snake, which represents the, central channel. And then it shows this Ida and Pingala. And then with alternate nostril breathing that you were just mentioning, basically, as you said, it balances these channels and then opens the central channel, the Sushumna, so that the Kundalini energy can rise unobstructed, which is felt to be beneficial in terms of the states of mind. Yeah. So just with that little background, and I also wanted to mention too, that the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, for people who aren't familiar with that, so the sympathetic is part of the autonomic nervous system that drives the stress response, the fight or flight or freeze response. And then the parasympathetic is the part of the autonomic nervous system that is the either called the relaxation response or the rest and digest response. So just a little bit of background for people who might not be familiar. And with that, I want to remind our listeners that today on the Yoga Hour, my guest is Dr. Stella Wuttke, and today's conversation is about sound frequencies through the lens of ancient Vedic wisdom as well as modern science. Dr. Wuttke is a neuroscientist and sound therapist who bridges brain science and healing through neurofeedback, tuning fork therapy, and meditation. She's the co-founder of the Infinite Potential Institute in Santa Barbara, and she's the founder of an organization called awakeningstillpoint.com. For more information about Dr. Wuttke, her podcasts, and teaching schedule, you can check out her website, WuttkeIPI.com. And again, Wuttke is WUTTKE. IPI, Infinite Potential Institute, so WuttkeIPI.com, and then awakeningstillpoint.com. We welcome your comments and questions. You can contact us via that website, theyogahour.com. Whew, I feel like we've really done a pretty fast run through for a lot of information about the science behind I guess where physics is right now, but also underlying what we're talking about today, which is sound's effects on the body. I did want to touch back on this, quantum field theory, which postulates that the universe is made of fluid-like fields fluctuating and spread everywhere throughout the universe. And I am also going to put a link to this presentation by Professor David Tong of Cambridge University. I was so fascinated by this, Stella, when I looked at it, where he was basically saying, that the way that we have been looking at the cell as there's a nucleus made up of protons and neutrons, and then there are these electrons that are orbiting, around that nucleus. He says basically that that's a lie. This is what he says. And then he makes the case that, there are fields with waves which are tied together into little bundles of energy. That's a really different way of looking at matter, even though, as I mentioned earlier with Einstein, there is this, equation that shows that there is a connection between matter and energy. But how does this view of fields and waves getting tied into little bundles of energy, how does that translate for you when you look at the human body? What does that make the body look like?
That's a good question, because I believe that from what I understand, for quantum physicists, it's often difficult to really make a clear picture of what they find. So, you mentioned that, we are basically, what he says in his talk is that these fields go through everything, so through us too. So if we have the electron field where the expression is, the electron, then it's just one field, and your electrons in your body and my electrons, is the same field. And, then, you hear about entanglements, and if it really, there's one field, underneath it everywhere, then that makes, in a way, more sense. And it's fascinating also because they found, I believe, that this entanglement this force is stronger, if I remember correctly, if those particles are closer together
Hmm.
and when they're further away. And now sometimes, we also have people who are closer to us, sometimes more in our mind than when they're further away. So that's just, an anecdote, but it's kind of fascinating. But, you know, you have also mentioned before how sound looks like and how cymatics, makes the vibration of sound visible. And when you see that and mandalas, how they look like, how the complexity, then what I, imagine in a way that, an unbelievable multitude of that complexity of one frequency is what makes us as individuals, our body, and, the different sheets and everything else. So, but then these complexities are also through the fields somehow entangled with each other.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So when we look at the body, as potentially being made up of energy, and I already mentioned this, but I want to dive into it more deeply. So let's talk about resonance. What is resonance, and why is it important in sound healing?
Yeah, so for example, when I work with tuning forks, so resonance, what that means is, for example, I often give the example, if you have two tuning forks and one is, for example, the overtone, so twice as much. So one is 100 frequency and one is 200. And I strike the 100 and then you just bring the other fork close to it without touching it, then the second one, which wasn't activated, will start vibrating. So
Right.
that's resonating. So now, if we use frequencies, music, or, tuning forks in my case, then the body will start resonating in with the same frequency. And the frequencies which are used for sound healing are usually frequencies which are found in nature. In nature, in general, when we are in nature, these frequencies, they are supporting our well-being. There's also research on that and forest bathing and what have you nowadays. And then another aspect of the tuning fork specifically, which I use, are the overtones. And the overtones are also have been called the stairway to heaven.
Hmm.
So it kind of elevates us somewhere.
Hmm.
And, the idea is that we kind of find a place of stillness in a way. And that's sometimes what people, experience when they are in a sound bath, or, are receiving sound healing, is that they drop to a very, still state of awareness.
Hmm.
And I think it's often this stillness where it's easier to connect to other realms or more subtle fields.
Hmm. Hmm. So one of the things that I thought was so interesting about, about everything we've been talking about is the potential it opens for people to self-heal using sound. And you asked an interesting question in your slides, which was about resonance. When you're talking about resonance, you were asking, what is it that you resonate with? Because this is happening. It's not a conscious process. Our resonance is not something that we have to will to bring into being. It's just something that happens. And so, for example, if someone, has an altar in their home, they can then potentially resonate more with things that they bring onto that altar, which might be something beautiful like flowers, or it might be a picture of a spiritual teacher, might be a beautiful scene from nature. So can you talk a little bit more about being more conscious about what we're resonating with?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I go into spiritual practice, sometimes we say, oh, sometimes we have the feeling, we resonate with a person when we meet that
Right.
person right away, and we are on the same,
The
basically
same
wave,
wavelength, right?
right? And it might actually be that in a way that,
Interesting.
we, and then other, so it can be the opposite, of course, too. And in Vedic, philosophy, sometimes, if you have different deities, then these deities have specific mantras.
Right.
You can just repeat, the name of the deity, like Om Namah Shivaya. You
Hmm.
can, then they have specific bija mantras, and
Right.
they have the yantra, which is a geographical pattern, but that expresses the vibration, what that deity stands for.
Right.
And so if we chant, we are producing this vibration.
Hmm.
And as we continue, we start resonating more and more in a way that it almost becomes like a part of us.
Right.
So this, like, for example, you know, Ganesha, the elephant god, so to say, stands for removing obstacles. It
Hmm.
also is said that it's connected to finding solutions where logic or analytic thinking is, so to say, failing. So
Hmm.
more an intuitive path to a solution of a problem. And so if we work with the Bija mantra, or, the name mantra, so to say, of Ganesha, then we are supporting this energy within us.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then we are, our vibration is changing with that.
Hmm.
The idea is also then that, you know, we are changing within, but then how the outside interacts with us may change
Hmm.
because we are different. And it's sometimes things which we sense, which we may not know exactly that it's there, but we sense these more subtle vibrations. And
Hmm.
so, if you want to go in resonance with our spiritual teacher, for example, in the Kriya Yoga tradition, there's a specific mantra, which can be used. So often, teacher lineages have mantras which are basically, so to say, more activated for people who are following this path to support them.
Hmm.
So we can use that, but then also, reading the books of a teacher, really, or having a picture of that, and the picture in a way, like how we look in a way, is also an expression of how we vibrate.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I could go off, but I think I stop here with that. But so there's different ways how we can attune ourselves to specific forms of absolute knowledge, like specific deities, or then teacher lineages, which we can, align us to. And this will help us eventually, to also go in tune with absolute consciousness more generally. So
Hmm.
it's an avenue in a way to start with.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great description. Could you just say, some people may not be familiar with this idea of bija mantra.
Yes,
Bija
of
means
course.
seed. And so, can you just say a little bit more about what a bija mantra is? Because if someone is interested in bija mantra for a particular deity, they can look that up on the internet. But just what is a bija
Yeah.
mantra?
So Bija mantra is a seed mantra. So I think it's more closely connected to the vibration which defines something
Hmm.
in a way. I think sometimes, deities are even thought to be equal to their Bija mantra.
Hmm.
Then we also have the Bija mantras of the chakras.
Of the chakras, yeah.
And so we can chant either Om through the chakras or we can use the Bija mantras.
Hmm.
And the interesting part of, the five centers is also they are connected to the different elements. And so by chanting up and down the chakras, we can support balancing the elements within our body. And something also interesting about the Om Namah Shivaya mantra is Na Ma Shivaya. So Na Ma Shivaya. So these five parts are connected to the elements in the five chakras, the
Hmm.
first.
Hmm.
So by if you are, inclined or feel inspired to use Om Namah Shivaya, then you're also balancing these five elements.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I just thought that was so interesting to think about how each of us individually can use this idea of sound vibrations affecting our bodies. So let's just touch back on that a little bit more. As I mentioned, we do have this vital force within our bodies, which is called prana, which flows through the body in channels that are called nadi. NADI. And then, according to Vedic medicine, there's a very sophisticated map of these energy channels throughout the body. And there's various counts of the number of nadis, but up to, for example, 72,000 nadis, of these little energy channels throughout the body, which carry this prana or life force. And both Ayurveda and also yoga really look at, various health issues as potentially coming from an imbalance in the energy flows in the body. So when I look as a Western trained physician, when I look at this, I always think of it as this energetic architecture. It's like the architecture underneath the skin of our, well, actually extends probably beyond the skin, but anyway, this underlying the physical form of our bones and muscles and organs and that, sort of thing. And then what can cause a blockage, and prevent the free flow of energy is a lot of different things. So it could be trauma, as you've already mentioned. It could be, repetitive patterns of muscle tension in the body. Like, for example, whenever in a yoga class, in a postural yoga class, the instructor says, and sense your shoulders and see if there's any tension you can release from your shoulders. There is always tension I can release from my shoulders and my jaw. For me, those are the big ones. I hold tension in my jaw and my shoulders. So anyway, those kinds of things can block the free flow of energy. And then when I think about the energy of sound, it's not a stretch to really think that that would have an effect on the energy of our body through resonance. So
Right.
again, that's just all of the way I put it together. What do you think of that formulation?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's really interconnected. Like I said, Mario always says, it's all there, it's all here.
Right,
So, and what we call physical with the more subtle and also our emotions, it's interconnected.
right,
Because, where does the tension come from? And sometimes when we do, for example, hatha yoga, then sometimes emotions can come up from that too, because we are touching maybe the physical expression of that tension or what we call it sometimes knots.
right.
And with sound healing is the same. And with sound healing, you can basically also sense sometimes these blockages or called knots, and then support a better energy flow
Mhm.
in that area again. So it's really interconnected. For me, there is no questions and doubt about that. Also from my experience. And I think for listeners, it's really important that, we really can start to interact, through mantras and even humming and sounding, like sometimes we hold so much in, and it doesn't mean that, we should scream at a person we are angry, but maybe scream when you're alone, or maybe, let that energy go through you, because emotion is energy in motion. So it's not good if there's also a theory from Dr. John Boyer actually that, it's good, we have to learn to resonate with everything and let just the wave go through us.
Mm-hmm.
It's when we tighten, when we block it, that's kind of where the trouble starts.
Mm-hmm.
So learning to be really fluid and letting everything through, which I think is possible as we learn to go in resonance with more and more frequency, but also when we learn to anchor ourselves more through our spiritual practice in the calm and quiet and in this, absolute stillness. And we can really connect with that, with the mantra practices. And I think it's like a mathematical equation that that's possible, but we also have to stick with it for months or maybe a few years and not just one day.
Right, right. Yeah, there was a Western trained physician who really got into yoga, Dr. Timothy McCall, and he was saying yoga is a strong medicine and it's slow medicine. It's not
Yes.
it's not fast,
Yeah.
medicine. So I think that is it's something that's good to keep in mind. So I wanted to touch on music then, because obviously music is sound, and so the things we've been talking about resonance, really are also at play when we're listening to music. And I believe many people use music, consciously or not, as a way of shifting their state. Although it's funny, if I'm really down, in the same way that I only feel like sitting on the couch and eating junk food and watching, daytime TV, sometimes it feels really good to listen to really sad songs then, right? when you're already sad, maybe that helps to move through, an expression.
Right.
But if I want to, for example, get moving, music can be helpful, in that, get me up and moving. So what, can you talk about that in terms of the sound effects of music on our mental health and or on our physical health, and how we might be able to use them more consciously?
Yeah. I think sometimes people, think of, you know, emotions have all a specific frequency and, and sounds, and that's really used in every, movie and commercial, so
That's right.
you
Yeah.
know you can really, be a little bit more aware of that, how that influences us. And sorry, what was the question?
Oh, it was just, just to be more, I think maybe you even already answered it already, just to be more conscious,
Oh,
of,
yeah. Absolutely. And, in general, I'm not so 100% familiar with really the science, what people find with music. But music, what I know is there is scientific research that it shows it affects our emotion and our cognition. And that probably would be another episode of your podcast talking
right,
about
right.
what happens in the brain when we are stressed, because the frontal lobes, and then it's if the frontal lobes are affected, that means we are not so in control of our emotions, and we can't focus that well, as just two examples. And then on the other hand, there's research for meditation, and also mantra practice shows that it kind of does the opposite. So it helps us with emotional balance and helps us to be more focused. And with that, not going so much into, mind wandering.
Hmm.
So it supports us to be in the present. And there's actually a science publication. Science is one of the highest ranking scientific journals. And there is a publication showing that if you're in the present, and doesn't matter if it's so nice or not so nice or pleasurable what you're doing, but if you're not mind wandering, but if you are in the present moment,
Yeah.
that alone will make you happier
Mm.
than when you're mind wandering.
That's right. So mindfulness, that's, I think, a term people are used to, which is just being more aware and plugged into whatever is happening, which I
Right.
think is challenging in today where there's so many distractions. People often will be walking, but they won't be really paying attention to what they're walking through or by. They have their, headphones in and they're listening to a podcast or whatever.
Right.
So, unbelievably, we've already come to the close of our time together. So, in closing, what words of encouragement or inspiration would you like to share with our listeners?
Mm, I think I tapped into that a little bit before already, is really knowing that what we are doing in our spiritual practice is is really like gathering fruits and harvesting. It's really, there is an effect to what we are doing. It's clearly affecting our within, our even our brain, actually the physiological, but also, how reactive or non-reactive we are to things. And then it's really, when we are working with deities or our spiritual teachers, there's an interactive interaction. It doesn't only go one way. We are not doing this into the void. There's a response to it.
Mm,
So yeah, it really has a response and an effect. So it's worth sticking through the times where we feel, oh, there's nothing happening in our spiritual practice. It's like adding up, and sometimes it feels like a long plateau, but uh, we are still gathering the fruits.
yeah, I think that's great. The fruits of steady and continuing practice, even when it seems like nothing is happening. I think that's great. For our listeners, you've been listening to the Yoga Hour. It's been my pleasure to share this time with you. I'm Dr. Laurel Trujillo, host and producer of the show. My guest today has been Dr. Stella Wuttke, a neuroscientist and sound healing practitioner whose research explores how the brain shapes our perception. And Stella specializes in neurofeedback, sound therapy, and meditation. She's co founder of the Infinite Potential Institute in Santa Barbara, California, as well as being a meditation teacher in the Kriya Yoga tradition, helping clients harness the power of the mind to heal and awaken their true potential. For more information about Stella, Dr. Stella Wuttke, you can check out wuttkeIPI.com. Also, follow her on Facebook and Instagram. And I just want to thank you, Dr. Stella Wuttke, for joining me today on the Yoga Hour. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you very, very much for inviting me again. It was a great pleasure,
Oh,
and yeah, to share these topics.
indeed. So, for listeners, we hope you'll join us for the many online programs offered by the sponsor of this program, the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment. There is daily online meditation in the mornings at 6:30 a.m., in the afternoon at 4, and Monday evenings at 7:30. All those times are Pacific time. There's also a Sunday satsang. Satsang is a Sanskrit word meaning a gathering of truth seekers, and that happens at 10 a.m. Pacific each week. There will be a Kriya Yoga meditation retreat with Yogacharya O'Brien, and that will be both in person in San Jose, California, and online, and that's happening from June 25th to 28th, 2026. You can find out more about this Kriya Yoga meditation retreat, as well as many other programs, at the website csecenter.org. We encourage listeners to check out another podcast, the Kriya Yoga Today podcast, which is from Yogacharya Ellen Grace O'Brien and includes presentations from classes and talks that she has given. Again, Kriya Yoga Today. You can find that through the CSE website, csecenter.org, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please join us next time when my guest will be Acharya Sundari Jensen, the Senior Kriya Yoga Acharya and Executive Director at the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment. And we're going to be talking about Kriya Yoga as a refuge of light, steadiness, and soul guidance. The Yoga Hour is a service project of the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment, a meditation center in the Kriya Yoga tradition. Remember, you can like, share, and comment on the Yoga Hour podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're enjoying the show, share it with a friend. I want to thank the Yoga Hour team, founder and spiritual director Yogacharya Ellen Grace O'Brien, senior Acharya Sundari Jensen, assistant producers Lauren Leidinger, Robbie Wood, Laurel Verissimo, and Mickey Coronado. I look forward to being with you again. Until then, remember, you carry your own healing and wholeness within you. Share your peace and your joy with all whom you meet. Bye now.